That as families look to get into the housing market right now, it's getting more and more difficult. And even as families save up and work hard, every passing year seems to get housing further and further away from them. And that's one of the big challenges around affordability that we're focused on.
It's almost cliche to make a video about the housing crisis in Canada. There are more YouTubers creating videos about Canada's housing crisis than stars in the sky. So with all this talk, why is housing still so unaffordable? Why, with all the talk, little has happened? Housing prices are still increasing. Will they ever become affordable to most Canadians? Well, that's what we are going to find out, so stay tuned. Housing prices in Canada and much of the Anglophone world have skyrocketed over the first few decades, even as incomes have stalled generally. Oh, also, for those who don't know, the word Anglophone refers to Britain and her settler nations, namely Canada, the US, and Australia. The reason each of these countries has a housing crisis is specific to their context, but there are general themes we can see from them, including the rise of financialization, strong property rights systems, and lower stocks of social housing when compared to places in Europe especially. But housing is a problem from China to Nigeria, so let's think about it simply. Let's say you live in a small town with a factory. Anyone who wants a job in that factory will need to live in that town or surrounding suburbs. Now add more and more factories. Now you have a city. And all these new job seekers must compete for housing on limited land. Now, while Canada may be the second biggest country in the world by landmass, it's actually very concentrated, with most of the population living on a narrow strip along the US border. In fact, 50% of Canadians live south of several parts of the US, including Minnesota, North Dakota, and other states. Due mainly to Canada's climate and rugged terrain, jobs and activity in the country are concentrated in a very few cities, namely Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver. This also means that although Canada is a larger country than the US, it actually has a worse population distribution, meaning more Canadians have to live in fewer cities. See, although politicians talk about creating affordable housing, the reality is that the wealth of Canada's middle class is tied to the price of housing. If prices were to drop, many people, including many politicians, would lose out financially. While rhetoric around housing has increased, they are not much higher than they have been over the past 3 decades. In reality, policies only help to increase the prices of housing without actually making it affordable. The Liberal government's first-time homebuyer scheme was made to help families afford their first house through several incentives, but has the effect of increasing demand for housing and thus price. Families who previously could not afford a house will now attempt to buy one, increasing the price of housing without actually making housing much cheaper for anyone. A Vancouver Sun piece highlighted just how many members of parliament have their own wealth tied to housing. The article questioned how our political body can make fair decisions when they have personal economic interests in the norm, and I think that's a good question. If politicians have their personal income tied to a high price of housing, why would they ever want to make affordable housing? This is not a new problem and was theorized by many, including the almighty Adam Smith, who said, "The interest of the businessman is always in some respects different from, and even opposite to, that of the public. The proposal of any new law or regulation of commerce comes from an order of men who have generally have an interest to deceive and even oppress the public." Adam Smith, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations.
Yeah, a new report card released here at Queen's Park today criticizing the Ford government for not getting the proper housing built, certainly not delivering on the housing crisis, saying it's not the type of housing at the right places or the right prices.
What Smith is saying is that businessmen or men of commerce will have other interests other than the general public will.
In Ontario, the government's failure to build housing of the right kind and for the right price looks almost like political sabotage. That may be part of the reason housing starts are now higher than they were in the 60s. There are many ways policies favor certain groups over others. Politicians in countries with high housing costs often use these sorts of policies. So, let's look at just a few examples on how political groups can and may have inflated the price of housing against the interests of the public. Well, the non-millionaire ones at least. The main method governments use to increase the price of housing is through taxation. By applying higher taxes to housing construction, i.e. development fees, politicians can put up barriers against the creation of new homes, which is exactly what they've done. By applying a tax to a certain economic activity, the government is manipulating citizen behavior. According to the Canadian Centre for Economic Analysis, Canada, more than any other country, uses its taxes to disincentivize housing construction. In Ontario, new home buyers pay an additional 1/3 the price of their home in taxes alone. Development fees are supposed to pay for infrastructure and services needed for new units. But according to one Toronto commentator, development fees in the city have been spent on other infrastructure and services against the best practices of urban planning. He even went as far as to say the city's development taxes make no sense. In theory, development fees are paid by housing developers to the city so that they can set up their water, sewage, electricity services, etc. and etc. But in Toronto, development fees have gone to repairing broken infrastructure, held in funds, and all sorts of things, not always related to utilities. Development fees, along with land transfer taxes and HST, are just one part of the story. These taxes become a revenue source for the City of Toronto and Ontario and end up reducing the number of housing suppliers available. There's another side to it. Beyond its racial and class dimensions, zoning also manages to push up the price of housing. Initially made at the beginning of the 20th century, zoning laws were meant for safety and well-being reasons, but eventually special interest turned zoning laws into a way for current homeowners to restrict the availability of housing for future homeowners. Toronto's recently increased zoning has had the effect of allowing for more housing. Now, if development fees can come down, they can actually get it built. Through taxation and zoning, the price of housing becomes artificially increased. Far from the free market, the price of housing is subsidized due to its importance to the Canadian economy. In 2023, the housing sector made up 40% of the entire Canadian gross domestic product. Any fall in the price of housing would be catastrophic for overall GDP figures in the country. Whether we are talking about the first-time home buyers plan, development fees, or zoning, all these actions work to reduce the supply of housing, which increases the price. And for decades, that price has been supporting the economies of Canada and Australia especially. Having an economy weighted so heavily to home ownership means the price of housing defines the nation as a whole. Redirecting the Canadian economy to build more housing will take a lot of work. A major goal should include creating a better long-term rental market, like they have in Germany. Another idea is taking a land value tax. A land value tax reduces the speculative element in land pricing by leaves more money for productive capital investment. This happens by taxing a certain percentage of the increased value of land. So as the price of land increases, so does tax revenue. If you do not build on the land, you are then paying a tax. This reduces speculative holding of land. It also increases city revenue, which can reduce burdens on those who are actually trying to supply new housing. But any solution will mean dealing with political representatives who are largely not renters, own land, and do not want the price lowered. Any dealing with that will take smart organizing. Solving the housing crisis means dealing with the real problems holding good solutions back. Politics is often something we do try to avoid, but here it is necessary to build more homes. The intricacies of how to make our officials more representative is a long and complex issue. The rest you'll have to figure out by yourself. Thank you.